Metabolic effects of late-night eating, separating timing from composition. The conventional wisdom surrounding late-night eating typically focuses on timing while treating all evening foods equivalently. However, emerging research suggests that macronutrient composition may interact with meal timing to modulate metabolic responses in ways that complicate simple, don't eat after 8 p.m. recommendations. This complexity offers both scientific insight into metabolism's temporal dynamics and practical guidance for individuals whose schedules or preferences include evening eating despite optimal chronobiology suggesting otherwise. Acute feeding studies varying macronutrient composition of late meals reveal differential metabolic responses. High-carbohydrate meals consumed in evening hours produce more pronounced glucose excursions compared to identical meals eaten earlier in the day, reflecting the well-documented circadian decline in glucose tolerance and insulin sensitivity as evening progresses. The pancreatic insulin response shows attenuated amplitude in evening hours, creating conditions where carbohydrate loads challenge glucose homeostasis more substantially than during morning or midday hours. This temporal variation in carbohydrate tolerance suggests particular caution with high glycemic late meals. High-fat evening meals present different challenges. Triglyceride clearance slows during nighttime hours, potentially related to reduced lipoprotein lipase activity and altered hepatic processing during circadian phases, typically associated with fasting. Late consumption of fat-rich meals may result in prolonged postprandial lipemia extending into sleep hours, with unclear long-term consequences for cardiovascular health. Some data suggest impaired sleep architecture following high-fat evening eating, possibly mediated through gastrointestinal discomfort or altered metabolic signaling affecting sleep-wake regulation. Protein-dominant late meals appear to generate more favorable metabolic profiles relative to high-carbohydrate or high-fat alternatives. The modest glucose response to protein, combined with protein's thermogenic effects and satiety properties, may blunt some adverse metabolic consequences of late eating. Additionally, evening protein intake might support overnight muscle protein synthesis, particularly relevant for athletes or older adults concerned about muscle maintenance. However, very large protein loads may still disrupt sleep through increased metabolic heat production or gastrointestinal processing demands. The interaction effects between timing and composition likely operate through multiple mechanisms. Circadian clocks in peripheral tissues, including liver, pancreas, and adipose tissue, oscillate with different phases and amplitudes, creating temporal windows where specific nutrient processing pathways function optimally or suboptimally. Eating against these circadian preferences, high carbohydrate when glucose tolerance nadir occurs, fat when lipid processing slows, creates metabolic mismatch that manifests as exaggerated postprandial responses. The magnitude of these timing composition interactions appears individually variable, potentially related to chronotype, genetic variants in clock genes, or habitual eating patterns. Sleep disruption represents another mechanistic pathway linking late meal composition to metabolic outcomes. Foods requiring extensive digestion, producing gastrointestinal distress, or stimulating arousal pathways may fragment sleep, and poor sleep quality independently impairs glucose metabolism and appetite regulation. The composition-specific sleep effects create indirect metabolic consequences beyond direct nutrient processing, establishing recursive relationships between evening eating patterns, sleep quality, and daytime metabolic function. From a practical perspective, these findings suggest harm reduction approaches for individuals unable or unwilling to eliminate evening eating entirely. When late eating occurs, favoring protein-rich, moderate carbohydrate meals over high glycemic carbohydrates or heavy fat loads may minimize adverse metabolic spikes. Portion control remains critical. Even optimal macronutrient distributions produce problematic responses when consumed in excessive quantities late in the day. The timing composition interaction doesn't eliminate late eating concerns, but potentially moderates them. The research limitations merit acknowledgement. Most studies examine acute responses rather than long-term outcomes, leaving chronic health implications speculative. Individual variation in responses likely exceeds average effects, meaning composition recommendations may prove helpful for some individuals, but irrelevant for others. The interaction complexity argues against oversimplified rules, instead suggesting personalized experimentation for those regularly eating late. Continuous glucose monitoring and subjective sleep quality tracking might help individuals identify which late meal compositions their particular metabolism tolerates best, acknowledging that universal prescriptions oversimplify biological reality.